In the grand scheme of things, Earth was considered a bit of a cosmic backwater. Sure, it had its charms, oceans, mountains, a baffling array of weather patterns, but to the rest of the galaxy, it was mostly known as a death world. This was not a term of endearment. It was a designation given by the Galactic Council to planets where the local flora and fauna were so dangerous that only the most foolhardy or desperate would consider setting foot there. Earth, with its hurricanes, earthquakes, venomous creatures and humans, was at the top of that list. The Zogthar Collective, a race of highly advanced, highly bureaucratic aliens, had been eyeing Earth for some time. They were a species of meticulous planners, known for their ability to anticipate every possible outcome of any given situation. Their invasion plans were the stuff of legend, carefully crafted, flawlessly executed, and utterly devastating. They had conquered dozens of worlds, each more challenging than the last, and Earth was to be their crowning achievement. The Zogthar had prepared for everything. They had studied Earth's history, its cultures, its military strategies. They had analyzed the human psyche, catalogued every weapon ever invented, and even accounted for the unpredictable nature of Earth's weather. They had developed countermeasures for nuclear weapons, biological warfare, and even the possibility of a global uprising. They had thought of everything, except for cats. It was a bright, sunny day in the small town of Willowbrook when the Zogthar invasion began. The sky darkened as their massive ships descended, blotting out the sun and sending the townspeople into a panic. The Zogthar, with their sleek metallic exoskeletons and glowing red eyes, marched through the streets, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Resistance was futile, they declared in their cold, mechanical voices. Earth would be theirs. But in a small, unassuming house on the edge of town, a young girl named Felicity was not panicking. Felicity had dark red hair and blue eyes that could command army, quite literally, and a penchant for getting into trouble. She was also, though no one knew it, a master of a very particular and peculiar skill, the art of animal persuasion. Felicity had always had a way with animals. From a young age, she could coax birds to land on her outstretched hand, convince squirrels to share their acorns, and even get the neighbor's dog to stop barking at the mailman. But her true talent lay with cats. Cats, those aloof, independent creatures, seemed to understand Lucy in a way that no one else did, and Lucy, in turn, understood them. So when the Zogthar ships appeared in the sky, Felicity did not run or hide. Instead, she calmly walked to her backyard, where a dozen or so cats lounged in the sun, as they did every day. There was Mr. Whiskers, the grumpy old tabby, Snowball, the fluffy white Persian, and Midnight, the sleek black cat with eyes like emeralds. They all looked up as approached, their tails twitching in curiosity. "Listen up," Felicity said, her voice steady and serious. "We've got a problem." The cats blinked at her, their expressions unreadable. "Those aliens," Felicity continued, pointing to the sky, "they think they can just come here and take over, but they're wrong. And do you know why?" The cats tilted their heads, as if considering the question. "Because they don't know about you," Felicity said, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "They think you're just pets, but I know better. I know what you're really capable of." Mr. Whiskers let out a low, rumbling purr, and the other cats followed suit. They were listening. Felicity knelt down, her eyes level with the cats. "I need your help," she said. "We need to show those aliens that Earth isn't theirs for the taking. We need to show them what happens when they mess with us." The cats exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing in determination. They understood. They always understood. The Zogthar, for all their planning, had not anticipated what happened next. As they marched through the streets of Willowbrook, they began to notice something strange. Cats, dozens, then hundreds of cats, were appearing from every direction. They came from alleyways, from rooftops, from behind bushes and undercars. They moved with a silent, predatory grace, their eyes fixed on the invaders. At first, the Zogthar paid them no mind. After all, their initial scans had indicated that cats were of little threat, domesticated creatures that required only a pat on the head and the occasional treat. But as the cats began to circle them, the Zogthar started to feel a retreat might be a good idea for now. The Zogthar soldiers, despite their initial confusion, quickly regrouped. Their exoskeletons, though scratched and dented, had held up against the feline onslaught. The commander, a towering figure with a gleaming silver carapace and a voice like grinding gears, surveyed his troops. They were battered, yes, but far from defeated. "Report!" the commander barked, his voice echoing through the ranks. "Minor injuries, Commander," one of the soldiers replied, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "Scratches, bites, nothing serious." The commander's eyes glowed a deeper red as he processed the information. He had expected resistance, but not from creatures so small and seemingly insignificant. Still, the Zogthar were a proud race, and they had faced far worse in their conquests. A few scratches from Earth's domesticated animals were hardly a cause for concern. "Pathetic," the commander sneered. "We've faced the acid storms of Zyphor, the lava seas of Vortan, and the mindworms of Cathar. And now we're being held up by cats." A ripple of laughter spread through the ranks, a cold metallic sound that echoed off the walls of their ships. The commander raised a clawed hand, silencing them. "Enough," he said. "These creatures are nothing more than a nuisance. We have our orders. Return to the surface and eliminate them. Turn every last one of those fur-covered pests into dust." The soldiers saluted, their confidence restored, and began to march back toward the landing bays. The commander watched them go, his mind already moving on to the next phase of the invasion. But as he turned to leave, a strange feeling tugged at the back of his mind, a feeling he quickly dismissed as irrelevant. Meanwhile, in Willowbrook, Felicity, by those who knew her well, was not idle. She had watched the Zogthar retreat with a knowing smile, her mind already working on the next phase of her plan. The first wave had been a test, a way to gauge the aliens' response, and now that she knew what she was dealing with, it was time to escalate. Felicity stood in the center of her backyard, surrounded by her feline army. The cats, though victorious, were not celebrating. They sensed that the battle was far from over. Felicity knelt down and placed her hands on the ground, closing her eyes. She could feel the energy of the earth beneath her, the ancient power that flowed through every living thing. It was a power she had learned to harness, a gift passed down through generations of her family. "All right, everyone," Felicity said, her voice calm but commanding. "That was just the beginning. They're coming back, and this time they won't underestimate us. But we're not going to let them win. We're going to show them what Earth is really made of." The cats gathered around her, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Felicity began to chant, her words a low, melodic hum that resonated through the air. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and the cat's fur stood on end as the energy flowed into them. One by one, the cats began to change. Their bodies grew larger, their muscles rippling with newfound strength, their claws elongated, gleaming like polished steel, and their teeth sharpened into deadly fangs. Armor, sleek and black as night, materialized around their bodies, fitting perfectly to their forms. Their eyes, once merely reflective, now glowed with a fierce, unearthly light. Felicity opened her eyes, and the transformation was complete. Before her stood an army of feline warriors, each one a force of nature in its own right. She smiled, satisfied with her work. Not only had the cats transformed, but Felicity herself had grown into an adult, ready to kick some alien ass back to their homeworld. "Round 2, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Let's show them what happens when they mess with Earth." The Zogthar soldiers landed once more, their weapons primed and ready. They moved with precision, their confidence restored after the earlier embarrassment. But as they advanced through the town, they quickly realized that something was very, very wrong. The cats were waiting for them, but they were no longer the small, harmless creatures the Zogthar had encountered before. These were beasts, armored and powerful, their eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. The Zogthar hesitated, their confidence wavering as they took in the sight before them. "Fire!" the commander ordered, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The Zogthar soldiers opened fire, their energy weapons blazing. But the cats moved with impossible speed, dodging the blasts with ease. They leaped onto the soldiers, their claws slicing through the alien armor as if it were paper. The Zogthar, who had faced the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, were utterly unprepared for the ferocity of Felicity's feline army. The cats moved like shadows, their armored bodies a blur of motion as they tore through the ranks of the invaders. Claws that could slice through steel raked across exoskeletons, leaving deep gashes that sparked and sputtered with alien circuitry. Teeth that could crush bone sank into the Zogthar's limbs, severing vital connections and sending the soldiers crashing to the ground. The commander watched in horror as his troops were decimated. This was not the simple extermination mission he had anticipated. The cats were no longer just a nuisance, they were a force of nature, a living nightmare that defied all logic and reason. "Retreat!" the commander bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. "Fall back to the ships!" But it was too late. The cats were everywhere, their numbers seemingly endless. They swarmed over the Zogthar soldiers, overwhelming them with sheer ferocity. The once proud invaders, who had conquered worlds and crushed civilizations, were now reduced to a panicked, fleeing mob. Felicity watched from a distance, her eyes glowing with the same eerie light as her feline companions. She could feel the power coursing through her, the ancient energy of the earth that she had harnessed and channeled into her army. But she knew that this was only the beginning. The Zogthar would not give up so easily. They would regroup, they would adapt, and they would return with even greater force. Unless she gave them a reason not to. The Zogthar commander stumbled into the landing bay, his once pristine armor now battered and scorched. He could hear the screams of his soldiers echoing through the corridors, the sounds of battle growing fainter as more and more of his troops were cut down. He had to get back to the command ship, had to warn the others, had to... A low growl stopped him in his tracks. He turned slowly, his eyes widening in terror as he saw what awaited him. It was Mr. Whiskers, or at least what had once been Mr. Whiskers. The old tabby had grown to the size of a small horse, his fur bristling with energy. His eyes, once a dull yellow, now glowed with a fierce, unearthly light. His claws, each as long as a Zogtar's arm, scraped against the metal floor, sending sparks flying. The commander raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Mr. Whiskers pounced. The impact sent the commander crashing to the ground, his weapon skittering out of reach. He tried to scramble away, but Mr. Whiskers was too fast. The massive cat pinned him down, his claws digging into the commander's armor. "Please!" the commander gasped, his voice trembling with fear. We surrender." Mr. Whiskers let out a low, rumbling purr, as if considering the offer. Then, with a swift, almost casual motion, he swiped his claws across the commander's chest, tearing through the armor as if it were tissue paper. The commander let out a strangled cry as the claws dug into his flesh, but before he could react, Mr. Whiskers leaned in close, his glowing eyes boring into the commander's. And then, to the commander's utter disbelief, Mr. Whiskers spoke. "Tell your kind," the cat growled, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air, "that Earth is not theirs to take. Tell them what you've seen here today, and tell them that if they ever return, we will be waiting." With that, Mr. Whiskers released the commander, who scrambled to his feet and fled toward the nearest escape pod. The cat, watched him go, his eyes narrowing in satisfaction. The message had been delivered. Back on the surface, Felicity stood in the center of her backyard, surrounded by her feline army. The battle was over, and the Zogthar were retreating, their ships lifting off and disappearing into the sky. The cats, their armor gleaming in the sunlight, watched in silence as the last of the invaders fled. Felicity let out a slow breath, the tension draining from her body. She had done it. She had protected her home, her planet, from the invaders. But she knew that this was not the end. The Zogthar would spread the word and others would come. Earth was a death world after all, and there would always be those who sought to conquer it. But Felicity was ready. She had more tricks up her sleeve, more allies to call upon. The cats had been just the beginning. If the Zogthar or any aliens plan to try anything, we will be ready. As the last of the Zogthar ships vanished into the sky, Felicity stood in her backyard, surrounded by her feline army. The cats, their armor gleaming in the sunlight, began to revert to their normal sizes, their glowing eyes dimming as the ancient energy that had empowered them slowly dissipated. Felicity knelt down and patted Mr. Whiskers on the head, who purred contentedly, his massive form shrinking back to that of an ordinary, albeit slightly larger than average, tabby cat. "Good job, everyone," Felicity said, her voice filled with pride. "We showed them that Earth isn't a place to mess with." The cats meowed in agreement, their tails flicking with satisfaction. They knew their work was done, at least for now. Felicity watched as they began to disperse, returning to their usual haunts, rooftops, alleyways, and cozy spots in the sun. But she knew that if the need arose, they would be ready to fight again. Felicity stood up and looked to the sky, where the last traces of the Zogthar invasion force had disappeared. She knew that this victory was only the beginning. Earth was a death world, and there would always be those who sought to conquer it. But now, thanks to her and her feline friends, the planet was more prepared than ever. She had more allies to call upon, more creatures to empower if the need arose. The cats had been just the first line of defense. If the Zogthar or any other would-be invaders dared to return, they would find that Earth had many more surprises in store. Far across the galaxy, in the heart of the Zogthar Empire, the surviving members of the invasion force limped back to their homeworld. Their once proud fleet was now a shadow of its former self, with many ships damaged or destroyed. The soldiers who had survived the battle were battered and demoralized, their confidence shattered by the unexpected and humiliating defeat. The Zogthar commander, his armor still bearing the scars of his encounter with Mr. Whiskers, stood before the Emperor of the Zogthar, a towering figure draped in robes of shimmering black. The Emperor's eyes glowed with a cold, calculating light as he listened to the commander's report. "You were defeated," the Emperor said, his voice a low, menacing rumble, "by cats." The commander swallowed hard, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Yes, Your Excellency," he replied, his voice trembling. "The creatures of Earth. They were not what we expected. They were enhanced somehow. They tore through our ranks with ease. We were unprepared for such resistance." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "And you expect me to believe that these cats were responsible for the loss of an entire invasion force? Little balls of fluff?" The commander hesitated, knowing that his next words could very well seal his fate. "Yes, Your Excellency," he said finally. "The humans, they have powers we did not anticipate. They can control the creatures of their world, turn them into weapons. If we had stayed, we would have been annihilated." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the commander. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of the commander's words. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "You have failed me," he said, his voice cold and unforgiving. "But you have also brought me valuable information. Earth is more dangerous than we thought. It is not a world to be taken lightly. The commander bowed his head, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, Your Excellency," he said, his voice low and shaking. The Emperor turned away, his mind already working on the next steps. "We will not attempt another invasion," he said, more to himself than to the commander. "Not yet. But we will watch, we will learn, and when the time is right we will strike again. But next time we will be ready, and you're lucky that you brought something worthwhile back, or I would have had you executed on the spot." The commander, sensing that he had been dismissed, quickly exited the throne room, his heart still pounding in his chest. He knew that the Emperor's words were not just a promise, they were a warning. Earth was a death world, and it would not be conquered easily. But the Zogthar were nothing if not patient. They would bide their time, gather their strength, and when the moment was right, they would return. But as the commander left the throne room, he couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes, those razor-sharp claws, and the voice that had spoken to him with such terrifying clarity. He knew that Earth would not be an easy target, not as long as that small human girl and her army of cats stood ready to defend it.